Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna get up here just to create like a visual separation between these slides because I was sitting down and I was like, oh man, just bleeds over. So I am a big fan of playbooks. I think that we have heard a ton of case studies and examples. How do we kind of step back and be like, what is that playbook for us so that we can remember all of these lessons? So I'm here to walk through, what is that playbook for the product leader in today's day and age? I like to think of it as three different pieces. The first, before you can do anything, it's what's your mindset? How should you be thinking? And then you can get into how do I build? How do I build a lot faster? Get into how do I go to market? How do I go to market a lot faster? And then finally, as a product leader, you are ultimately in charge of scaling a team. How do you actually scale your team? So these are the four parts that I'm going to walk through today. Okay, starting with mindset. This is obvious to everyone. Your mindset has to be fundamentally different. Let's talk about the things that are different and really how do you think about that? So strategy, speed, and capacity. What do I mean? Strategy feels like new things are dropping every single day, new models come out, the technology fundamentally shifts. Your job is not to be an executor, a project manager. Like all of that piece of the job needs to fall away. We'll talk about how in a little bit. Your job is to be where is the puck going and how do I skate there as fast as possible? Also, strategy. Again, people are expecting adaptive, intelligent interfaces. And so, Brian's written a lot about this, though just businesses are falling away because we're like, well, this was the old way to do it. It was very static. And here's a new way. It's incredibly intelligent. Why would I pay for the old way? And, I can literally build this myself. We're all builders now. Why would I pay SaaS incredible amounts of money for this thing? So strategy, it's evolving a ton. And how do you be the owner of the strategy and not necessarily an operating person? So that's the first piece. The second piece is speed. It's tied to what I just said. The speed at which things are changing, it's really, really fast, right? So the cycles today are literally like 100th of the time before. So before you can go like, we're going to do an annual plan. And now you're like, I can't do an annual plan because I literally don't know what's going to come out next month, right? So how do you actually turn your clock speed into the right cadence? We'll talk about that a little bit more in terms of how do you build and how to go to market. And then lastly, capacity. And this relates to how you scale your team. Your capacity is no longer you or even just the number of people in your organization. Your capacity is your people plus your agents plus your workflows. So ultimately, your capacity completely changes. But I do think in today's day and age, and again, this is a lot of the stuff that Brian, Bobby, folks have been talking about, it's really important to anchor in what hasn't changed and to remember these things. So to me, the things that really have not changed are our jobs as product leaders is to really think about what is the user problem we're solving for. Now, this idea of like what's a user problem and what's something you can drive value from is so, so important today because the more garbage in that you put in, the more garbage out you get out. And so if you're just saying, well, I can speed capacity, this is amazing, I can build so fast, you're just getting a bunch of garbage out if you don't know actually how you're capturing value and what you're trying to solve for. And that bleeds into the second piece, which is sound economics, right? Like never before could you light money on fire. It's like today. You're like, oh, compute, oh my God. Just like literally like my costs have skyrocketed. And there are a lot of companies today where it looks amazing for the first year. And then everyone churns because guess what? Someone else has it and it's free. And so this idea of like, how do you really think about the sound economics, not just right now, but kind of out over time? And then lastly, user trust. Like this is always really important in product design, but never before is it this important because we're dealing with probabilistic systems as opposed to like static flows, deterministic systems. So how do you actually create user trust when you're like, actually for some people, this feels like a black box. So this user trust piece, I'm really being thoughtful about how you design and do product where that trust is really at the forefront, especially when there's skepticism from certain user groups, depending on who you're building for. Not everyone's embracing AI. That piece is super, super important. So to me, this means that your responsibilities are, like this is the mantra I tell myself. My responsibilities are, one, what is the strategy? I'm not an executor. I'm not a project manager. I'm always asking myself, do I have a firm view on what the strategy is for the business that I'm working on? The second thing is, how can you be the absolute beacon in your company of how to move at speed? So you're not waiting for the engineering leader to, play around with something. You are testing tools. You're bringing the tools into the organization. You have to model it, because if you don't, people are going to look to the biggest, like the leader. And I would say it starts with CEO. And if you're not the CEO, then you got to do it, right? The same way that Casey is modeling, all of us need to be modeling. And then lastly, this idea of getting very, very intentional, literally writing out a plan. The same way you did headcount planning, writing out a plan of how you're going to scale yourself, not just through headcount, but also through leverage, essentially agents and workflows. So that's how I think about, this is the mindset shift that you really have to embrace. Okay, let's talk about how do you build at speed. I think a lot of you guys are doing pieces of this, but I want to again give you a framework of how I think about it and remind myself I do this every single day. I got to wake up and do this every single day. So I think of it as there are two buckets of things and then a principle. So the first bucket is, what are all the old jobs that I or another team or any person at that company is doing that takes time? We should be automating that work. And then for product especially, this idea of, okay, before your sword was a Google Doc, i.e. a spec. And now your sword is, I can be a builder. I can design the thing. I can, literally code the thing, deploy it. Devin does a great job deploying a lot of my garbage. You can be this full stack builder in a way that you couldn't before. And so again, I just think to myself, how do I expand my sword all the time? And then lastly, this idea, and we talk about this frequently, and I'll give some examples here. This idea of when you are showing the pixels and visuals, there is the lossiness of the communication goes down, right? You're able to say, this is what I'm talking about. This is what it would look like. Versus I wrote a document, and when you read the document, you probably closed your eyes and thought about different things, and therefore it took a month to align. So really the idea of precision, as opposed to a lot of things before was motion. I did the document, I did meeting, and it's well, you didn't get any precision out of that, and so we still don't know what we're talking about. So I want to go through a couple examples. The most obvious example in the old jobs faster is the idea of synthesizing customer feedback, doing market research, competitive analysis. So, maybe just a show of hands, who here has in the past, or even today, which I would say we're kind of behind, let's move forward, sat in a voice of the customer meeting where, on a monthly cadence, on a maybe bi-weekly cadence, people came in, they wrote down what the support team said, they wrote down what the sales team said, and then you kind of looked at it all, you kind of squinted at it, and then someone wrote a report, the product person read the report, the whole product team got together, looked at the report, and they're I wonder how this informs my roadmap. So that just cannot happen. If that is what you are doing today, you need to either be using a product, and Reforge is an amazing insights product, or you should be building this yourself so that this is literally happening in real time, right? So this idea of, feedback comes in every moment. And I think Casey was saying this, you should be connecting all of your sources of where you get material, and think of every recording, every call, all of those things as a data point. And so you connect it all together and you're able to extract out of those sources and in real time pull the insights out. You should be looking at this on honestly, you could be looking at it on an hourly basis, but at the very least a daily basis. And by the way, it should involve no humans, no voice of the customer product specialist people who probably sit in some form, in some routines. They should be doing that. They should be building the agent, the workflow that does this versus doing that manually. So we think a lot about old jobs faster. I'll just go through what it was. So this, by the way, is super simple. Laurel ran a hackathon. Darren was the person who led voice of the customer, and he would do this very manual process. And he was I'm no longer going to be doing that. I'm going to build my own voice of the customer GPT. And this is actually a really good pro tip for you all. Do a hackathon, but do not include any engineers in the hackathon. In the past, it was one of those things when you did the hackathon, everyone's I don't get to participate because only engineers can build. And right now, you have to empower everyone to be actually, no, there are no engineers involved in this hackathon. You are the builder, which goes to what Casey was saying, onboard every single person like an engineer. You have the skills. You can do it. And so, Darren, not an engineer, led voice of the customer. He built this. And so in the future, people can just ask this. Hey, what's going on? Hey, give me the insights from the day. And then he's continuing to iterate on it. He's going to hook it up. So it just pushes it to you, right? Like that is what your team, everyone should be doing versus the old. So out with the old, in with the new. Let's talk about building quickly. So this is the part where it's like you're no longer just running a spec, you are doing the end-to-end prototyping. So Nick is a PM on our team at Laurel, and really quickly, I've been at Laurel for about 6 weeks, so the speed at which you can push change is incredible because we did not do this before, 6 weeks before, and then I'll show you a few other things later, which we did not do 6 weeks before. So again, the speed at which you can move is high, fast. And so what Nick is doing here is, again, I hope all of you are doing this. You're prototyping with Lovable, you're prototyping with Figma Make, you're prototyping with, V0. This specifically is V0. But 2 insights for you all. The first one is, how many times have you built a prototype and you're like, this does not look like my product? And therefore, when I show this thing to someone else, they're kind of like, I have to have really good imagination. Not everyone has a really good imagination. And all of a sudden have this like barrier in communication once again. So the first pro tip is, how do you actually take the time, investment upfront to get benefits later, of actually building out your components? And this can be as simple as literally building components in Storybook. Like this is what we're doing. Building that's a Storybook, and then Devin can pull those components and Lovable can point to those components so that when you are prompting in Lovable, the thing that you're building looks exactly like your product. So that's the first pro tip. Take the time to actually systematize, componentize all of the things that's in your design system. The other piece, the other insight, which is a little bit in the other direction, is think about all the cases where it does not matter that it's absolutely pixel perfect. It does not have to be Airbnb pixel perfect. It's just an admin dashboard. So this whole thing that was running behind me was prototyped in a day, and we're using ShadCN, which essentially can be shipped. I do not care what the admin looks like. And by the way, the admin looks so much better than the world that it looks like today, that was hodgepodge together over many years. Because guess what? ShadCN is consistent with itself. So this is the other piece. Find out the parts of your product where it doesn't actually matter for it to be absolutely perfect, and then use the frameworks out there to ship incredibly fast. Getting this prototype and getting this out is going to be about a month. Who in the world before these days have been like, I will do a complete admin redesign. I'm going to implement RBAC. I'm going to do all of these things and take me max 2 months. Like that is a dream. So we are in this era that we can build like never before. Okay, next, when it comes to next pro tip here, when it comes to prototyping, give these tools to your GTM teams. Marketing, support, sales. Down there, that is Eric. He's a co-founder of Laurel, who's now a salesperson. This is something he recorded a Loom that I took a screenshot of, and this is his prototype. And what he has all this context in his brain from the past 6 years of building with Laurel and talking to customers for over 6 years. What he's going to be able to put out is going to be vastly better than what I can soak up in 6 weeks. And so by giving him the tools, sitting him down, be like, this is how you use V0, those are the components that you can use, he's able to put something together that we can have a conversation around, and he has all the insights. So equip your GTM teams, not just your EPD teams, with these tools, because they know the user the best, especially, I'd say, in enterprise businesses, where every single person is talking about an enterprise customer that has pretty deep needs. And then lastly, when everyone on your team is pushing code, Avery is a customer support manager. On my second day at Laurel, I got up in front of the company and I said, we're going to get to the point where all of us are building features, and we're not going to be gated by the fact that we have an engineering team that can only do X amount. And specifically, Avery and I had a room in the car, and I was like, Avery's going to be shipping features. And everyone laughed, and I was like, this is going to be amazing. This week, last Thursday, Avery shipped her first feature. So again, the speed at which you guys can move, the empowerment that you can give your team, that is your new job as a product leader. How do you make that change happen? Not, hey, Avery, what are your 10 requests? And let me go put that in a RICE framework, and hopefully it comes out. And maybe one day you'll ship the thing that your customer wanted, but probably not. Okay, so let's move on to go-to-market side. So I'm a big believer of we can build things as fast as possible, in fact, faster than you've ever been able to build before. But guess what? If you build a lot of things and you do not tell your users about them, did it even happen? So your job, more so than anything else these days, is to expand beyond just the build and to get into some of these other pieces. So here's how I think you should think about it. The first thing that you have to think about is you have to ensure the organization is keeping the source of truth up to date. Now, it could be what Casey said, literally just plug everything in. It could be, you know what, that's a big ask. Maybe I'll start small. I'll start with GitHub. GitHub is actually the source of truth for the code. And I will start with my help center because that is a source of truth, at least externally facing. And I don't know, we'll do one Google Drive somewhere or one Notion integration, and maybe that's good enough. But start somewhere and know that your job is to make sure that source of truth system of record is maintained, because your AI, what you output, is only as good as your source of truth. Automate content creation. Look at the entire process, the same way that you're doing for EPD. What is the content creation process, and automate as much of it as possible. And again, this goes back to the voice of customer example. There are so many marketing, sales, blog writing, content producing examples. Let's automate all of those. And I'll give you a Stripe example in just 1 second. And lastly, this idea of an integrated team. It's not just product. I mean, product hands it off to marketing. It's integrated. So more so than ever, PMM is sitting in product, because that's the idea of like, it's just one team, one continuous loop, and just act as though the marketing team is an extension of your team, even if the reporting lines are not there. That's how you're going to ship the fastest, because that's your domain, and also make sure that everyone hears the truth zone. Okay, so really quick example from Stripe. Stripe is incredibly powerful. They're shipping all the time. Their API documentation is not always up to date. And in the past, there was a manual process to some degree to update it. So if you're connecting to the sources of truth, and we, expect to a Stripe PM, internal tooling, he actually led a hackathon using Replit to build an internal tool so that all of the API documentation can be updated in real time. And again, there still needs to be, this is important, systems thinking. There still needs to be some degree of review. It can't just be like, I just hooked it up and now agents and bots are just slaying API documentation and good luck. Like, there needs to be some kind of review system. That's the system that you need to build. But again, your job is to be like, how do I build that system? Not just say, like, okay, now I just got to write this piece of content or get somebody to write this piece of content, which is typically how things worked in the past. All right, last section, this idea of like your job as a product leader. How do you think about your team? You're scaling through leverage, not headcount. So this is something that I'm sure all of you have seen, this visual, this idea of we used to be here, lots of directors, lots of senior managers, and now we're here. And man, you should be, Jensen with 60 direct reports. It's not exactly that. I don't think anyone should have 60 direct reports, but if you think about agents as direct reports, and in fact, you probably should have like 1,000, right? So that is really how we should be thinking about it. And so specifically, it's really important for us to think about, one, what is changing about who we hire? What is changing about how we go find those people, how we hire? And finally, ultimately, how many do we need to hire? So starting with who we hire, again, this I think will resonate with many of you. This feels like this is where we're going. Universally, fast learners, systems thinkers, builders, right? Things are coming out at light speed. They have to be learning the tools. A lot of what I just mentioned, no tool is perfect. So few tools do all the things. Your job is to stitch tools together to get it to do what you want it to do. And so you have to be a systems thinker to know what pieces you plug together. And then finally, a builder. You're not like, hey, I thought of this system. I'm waiting for engineers to build it. You have to do it. And so you have to see this across all the functions. Now, specifically what is happening in each of the EPD functions, I'll stop at that for this talk. Product, Casey mentioned this. It is all about your taste and your judgment, right? Because things can happen without you. It is way less about your project management skills. In fact, that should be automated. For design, it's really about, again, depending on what your product is, but usually AI products, it's designing for some degree of trust building and error and recovery when the AI does not come back with what you think it should be. Like, how do you think about the design system that way? While product was blurring into the design role was blurring into the engineering role. So designers are essentially like, what's the difference between a front-end engineer and designer? Nothing. Like it's the designer using cursor. So you want to find the designers that are embracing that and at the edge of that, as opposed to being like, I'm still giving you a Figma. And finally, for engineers, it is all about that U curve. You want to find the architects. An agent can only be so effective on a code base. At Linktree, we deployed Devin. At the very beginning, it was horrible. It would literally take please log was staying. It'd be like complete ball of spaghetti. And it was actually because our code was a ball of spaghetti. And so you can't imagine that an agent can learn on a code base that a human would struggle to learn on. And so your first job is to architect the system. And that is why the senior engineers, the architects are incredibly important. But you actually don't need that middle, that hollowing out of the middle. You need the hustlers, the grinders, the people who don't have preconceived notions, who are not dinosaurs, who are going to challenge the status quo. You want those people, and those are the junior hires. So it's really this U curve of experience on one side, hustle on the other, so you can get the equivalent of an architect and also kind of those hackers. So how do you go hire for that type of person? Well, universally, you should just expect that people are using AI. In fact, you don't want to hire anyone who's not. So, whenever you have prompts, interview loops, where you're like, well, you can really cheat on those by just having that on the side of your screen, cut that. I'll give you some examples. I always give a prompt. Now, that's controversial. A lot of people are like, if I give a prompt, I'm basically asking people to do work. And a lot of people don't want to do work for my company. And it's like, well, you know what? Then don't work here. Like, we're at a point where we're moving super fast. Everyone has to be in at 120%. If you can't do a prompt, do you think that I'm going to enjoy working with you later? No. And if, by the way, you're not interested enough to do a prompt, this probably isn't a fit. So this idea of like it's a two-way fit, you're courting the one person. No, it's a two-way fit. Hiring to me is always a two-way fit. So I always give a prompt. And then I want to see them build in real time. That's the best way. Like I always say, and this surprises candidates, hey, can you screen share? Screen share your Figma. Screen share your Cloud project. Screen share your ChatGPT project. It is so telling when someone screen shares how much they'll build. So telling. There's no hiding it. You're just like, well, I didn't use it until last week. You're like, why? Like you should be using it every day. Right? So like when you ask people to screen share, that really gets you a sense of are they that real-time builder, that tinkerer? Okay, specifically product design engineering, how do we test? Product prompts, I never ask for a document. That is that's out. What's in is build a prototype. We should all be able to build prototypes. You should basically be able to see that person flex into design. Design, same thing. Build a prototype. Don't give me a Figma file. A Figma clickable file, maybe, but really like show me actually the edge cases, and we'll talk about that. And finally, like have them flex into design. And then on engineering, I actually want to know your tool stack breakdown. What tools have you tested? What tools have you discarded? That shows you the intellectual curiosity and how fast they're learning and testing things out. And then we ask for live AI demo usage. I don't expect you to code this thing from scratch and whiteboard anymore. That's, are you ever going to do that? It's like learning, like theory in college. Are you ever going to do this? No. And so don't test for it. Instead, how do you actually test for real AI usage live? So I just want to give you 2 prompts here as examples. On the left over here it's actually a product manager prompt. This prompt gives a CSV, asks this person to ask candidates to build a prototype. That is something that you would expect from potentially a data engineer, a database developer, even just a designer. And we're asking that because that gives us the most signal on the right type of hire today in PM. On the right over here, this is for design. Again, we're still asking them to build a prototype, but we're asking them to consider the edge cases. That is engineering thinking. Again, the best designers have always thought about this, but really explicitly calling out how do you think about all these different states. So just giving you a few examples of like how does your prompt change? How does your hiring process change in order for you to actually get the signal you want to get those builders on the top 1%? And so finally, your new toolkit for how you scale yourself is people, it is agents, and is workflows. And ultimately, leverage is the combination of all of these things. So really be able to even just write down for yourself. And when I say write down, I mean talk to ChatGPT, help it refine your thinking, and then ask it to give you the doc back, and you read it, and you're like, aha, this is my strategy. How are you actually going to have a portfolio approach? What are you going to ask each person to do in the stack? I want to give you a little example. Again, I've been here for 6 weeks. We went from a world where there was no Devon usage, only cursor usage. There were no agents built, to a world where 2 all hands ago, we had all of these agents built. And the big thing here is you sit down, you map out all your workflows. You don't just go like, agents for everyone, for you, agent, for you, an agent. Map out your workflows and you say, what are the biggest pain points? How many people in this room have been pinged in an Ask Engineering channel or an Ask Product channel for a question? And it interrupts your workflow and they're like, oh, God damn it, but I have to respond. So many of us. And that just should not happen anymore. If there's something urgent, yes, for sure. But in general, the questions are like, how does this thing work? Well, actually, it's documented on the Help Center. How does this thing work? Actually, you know what? If you just wrote GitHub, it will tell you. And so we built a Dust agent in order to do that. We built a Marketplace agent. We built all of these different agents. We built a voice of the customer agent. This is all happening organically. And the big push is you just have to put the money out there. Anything you're doing, taking time, turn to an agent. All right, so just to summarize, playbook, this framework that I think about all the time. What is your mindset shift? Have you gotten there? How are you speeding up the build process aggressively? How are you leaning on and owning parts of the go-to-market motion and process? And finally, how are you radically shifting the way you hire with both who you're looking for, how you're screening for them, and the idea of, one person with the right agents and workflows could do the work of 100. That's it. Thanks for joining me.